BMW introduced the X1 back in 2009 in Europe only, and in 2012 they brought the facelifted first gen over to the States. About 10 or so years later, I'm now sitting in a facelifted second generation vehicle, and I'm excited to see how it stacks up to the competition. This is a 2021 BMW X1, which starts at $35,000. You got to add an additional $2,000 if you want all-wheel drive, X-Drive, like this car has, although it's still front-wheel drive biased. Generally speaking, there aren't a whole lot of options for the X1 range. There is an M Sport package, although I don't think it's worth the $4,300 that it costs. Usually I'm a sucker for the M Sport look. In this case, I think it takes away from a bit of the SUV aesthetic that this car has going, and I don't think it's worth the money for what you get, which is basically a front bumper, a rear bumper, and some wheels. The two main packages are either the convenience package, which offers you a garage door opener, ambient lighting, auto dimming mirrors, although for some reason on all new BMWs now I've noticed it's only the rear view mirror and the driver's side view mirror, and the passenger side view mirror doesn't get auto dimming ever since I think 2016 or 2017. Very, very weird cost cutting by BMW, and it's maybe not as frustrating on an X1, but it's very frustrating on an $85,000 X5, for instance. You do, however, get power folding side view mirrors with the convenience package, as well as comfort access, keyless entry, a pano moonroof, and lumbar support, all for $2,250. The other option is the premium package, which gives you all of the same options from the convenience pack, as well as a head-up display, a heated steering wheel, and LED headlights. It's an additional $2,000, I believe, but just for the lights alone, it's worth it, going from what look to be like basic halogen headlights up to really nice LED headlights with auto high beam, and they have the really cool icon DRL style. It's definitely worth the money, in my opinion. If you're gonna already get the convenience package, might as well jump up to the premium. This particular car is equipped with that premium package as well as 19-inch wheels, making it a mid-equipped spec. What's the cost of all this, you might ask? $42,000 and change. You do get a standard intelligent safety system for that money, which includes lane departure warning, pedestrian warning, as well as front collision warning. So that's a nice touch, although this particular car does not have blind spot assist. The X1 only comes with a singular power plant option, that's the 28i, and that's a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder producing 228 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque. It also comes with an 8-speed automatic transmission, and unfortunately no paddle shifters here on this particular model. 0 to 60 happens in the mid to high 6s, but that's not what this Beamer is all about. It's about being an affordable and convenient entry into the BMW X lineup. Now let's get it back on the road and see how it drives. So believe it or not, in 2018, the X1 was actually BMW's best-selling model worldwide. And I'm not sure if that's still the case this year, but what I do know is that in 2020, so last model year, the X1 was facelifted. It was a very, very minimal facelift. It was mainly slightly different headlight and taillight design, slightly different front and rear bumper design, and a bit of nicer, more standard tech on the inside. But overall, the look, both inside and out, is very similar to the pre-facelift, and you'd have to kind of have the cars next to each other to easily notice that one's a facelift and one's a pre-facelift. Now, the driving experience is not signature BMW. Matter of fact, with your eyes closed, this could be just about any crossover. Now that can be considered a good or a bad thing. If you want a real BMW driving experience and maybe you don't have the money to spend on an X3 and X5 and so on, well, that's bad news, because this is not going to give you the BMW driving experience. If, on the other hand, you simply want a nice, luxurious, crossover, small compact SUV, well then that's good, because that's exactly what this is. If you want a taste of some of BMW's best, which unfortunately most of the lineup doesn't offer anymore, then add this to that list: bad. The truth is that the X1 shares a platform with the Mini Countryman, and the overall driving dynamics and driving experience are very similar to one another. The actual driving position is decent, but what I really don't like is that for a car that's meant to be or considered an SUV, you feel like you're sitting really low down, almost at the height of a sedan. And that's because when the X1 first came out as the first generation, it was kind of meant to be more of an Audi all-road competitor, and now it's kind of transitioned into this semi-SUV, semi-wagon, which I guess makes it the true definition of a crossover. It's just that now we live in the crossover craze era, so this is more, I guess, similarly marketed and positioned to, say, a Subaru Outback than it is to a true small SUV. I think of Mercedes-Benz GLB, I think of Audi Q3, I think of a Volvo XC40. Matter of fact, the X1's sportier sibling, the X2, which also shares a platform with the Mini Countryman, actually has more of the styling and proportions of a hatchback than a crossover. The result of this is that the X1 is still spacious and has the practicality of a wagon, but it sometimes feels a bit awkward, particularly on the interior. The good news is that the X1 does look like a BMW and not just a glorified Mini here on the inside, but there are things like this awkwardly and aggressively sloping dash line and a center console that's far too low down. It reminds me of the M235i Grand Coupe that I reviewed a couple months back. If you're used to, say, a 3 Series, a 4 Series, or even an X3, an X4, X5, you're just going to find yourself constantly reaching significantly lower down to interact with the gear lever, with the drive mode rocker, or the iDrive controller than you would otherwise in, again, those other cars. I think this has to do with that front wheel drive biased system and the drive shaft not being prominently designed as part of the center tunnel here. So you are able to put this stuff lower down, but really I prefer it being higher up and more naturally positioned near your hand. But back to the good news, which is that the overall material use actually feels pretty nice in here. It doesn't have a whole ton of scratchy plastics. Sure, it's not all leather and high quality materials either, but it's what you'd expect from an entry-level luxury vehicle. It's just a shame that entry-level luxury now costs over $40,000, at least as equipped. The steering is just like most BMWs of late, and the ASIN, or I don't know how to pronounce it, but the transmission that's not the ZF 8-speed, it's okay. It's not as good as the ZF, and I didn't notice that as much in the M235i Grand Coupe, but in this car, maybe it's due to the lower power output, maybe it's the ethos of this car. I just notice it more, and if I do push this car a little bit and use the gear lever to shift manually, it isn't as crisp and ridiculously fast as the ZF unit is, which I guess, again, makes sense, but strays away from the majority of the BMW lineup. This video wouldn't be complete without a pull, so one quick. A lot of turbo lag, but not too bad. It's what I expected from a 4-cylinder in a crossover. Now, the good news again is that this does not feel as clumsy as the Q3 I reviewed a couple months back. What's likely due to the lower center of gravity of this car and the slightly longer wheelbase that it also has versus the Q3. But it's not like driving prowess is this crossover's calling card. So I don't expect too much, and it definitely is decently satisfactory. It's decent to drive. It's not a horrible driving experience, and you can drive this car with a slight enthusiast touch and it still feels grounded, and it still has just a tiny bit of that BMW DNA hidden in there deep down. The truth is, it does understeer a lot more than I like, and that's due to the front wheel drive bias and how far forward that engine, it's a transverse engine, and it's so far forward, kind of past the front axle. So it does understeer, not as bad as the Audi though. The gauges, which are part of the facelift, the LCI, they're lovely. They're almost the exact same gauges you'd find in an M2 competition, which makes them sleek, clean, easy to read. They're backlit, half digital, half analog. I'm a fan of how simple everything is. And the head-up display that you get with this premium package car puts that speedo nice in your line of sight versus having to look down here at the bottom of the gauge cluster. So I'm very happy with that. And in fact, you can't even get a head-up display on the M2 or any 2 Series. So it's a really nice touch that at least the X1 does get head-up display. Now, the iDrive 6 is good as always, but it admittedly feels a bit more dated here in a 2021 car, especially when the rest of the BMW lineup is now getting that much improved iDrive 7 system. The good news is it's still touchscreen, and again, to me, it's still serviceable. I guess I'm just more willing to put up with it in a very driver-focused and driver-oriented car like an M2 than I am here in the X1. Now, to wrap up the interior, let's see how the X1's cup holders stack up with a little tall boy test. Now the exterior styling is definitely bottom tier BMW SAV styling, which is what you'd expect from the baby of the SUV lineup. From some angles it looks decent, from some other angles it looks a bit clunky and awkward. I would say overall it just looks okay. A bit more sporty and aggressive though in the M Sport, but that takes away from a bit of the SUV look as I mentioned earlier. The rear doesn't look as sharp as many modern BMWs, but the black exterior does help mask that a bit, and I think gray also works really nicely on the X1. The optional 19s also help this X1 look a bit more stout than if you had the standard 18s on, but the truth is that overall this BMW is more acceptable than exceptional. It feels more like an obvious business decision in the crossover crazy era we live in rather than a true BMW. So yeah, you would sit a bit higher up in a Q3, GLB, or a Volvo XC40, and if that's your main desire, those cars will suit that better. This has a more similar proportion, styling, and feel to a Lexus UX or the new Mercedes-Benz GLA. And between the Lexus, the Mercedes, and this, I'm likely taking either this or the new Mercedes. I actually would probably take this for its slightly more simple and clean interior over the Mercedes. But I also wouldn't mind just getting into the Mini Cooper, which has a bit more of at least styling, character, and identity to itself than this does. In reality, I would love to spend a few thousand more and get into a facelifted Q5 or the Volvo XC40, but I understand that these are typically lease specials, if you will, and can sometimes be a couple of $100 a month less than those other two cars. So if that's the case, I suppose it gets a pass from me. Ooh, Countryman and the Urus. Bam. At least you still get real exhaust, acceptable material use, a solid fit and finish, as well as a decent safety suite as standard. Many Beamers of late can't escape the fact that they are no longer representative of the BMW ethos. And while this is one of them, I guess I kind of give it the benefit of the doubt by virtue of its more budget-friendly entry price, as well as its low positioning within the lineup. If you guys enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. New videos are coming out every single week. And as always, this is Rio. Peace.